So today we want to briefly introduce to descriptive and analytic epidemiology. So we have discussed these concepts during the first lecture where we were discussing, where we introduced you to concept of epidemiology. But today I want to briefly discuss this concept a bit before we move to the next stage where we'll be discussing study designs. Study designs. So study designs, they then differ depending on whether you are doing descriptive or analytic epidemiology. So from this, descriptive epidemiology is like antecedent to analytical epidemiology. Then analytical epidemiology studies requires information to know where to look for, to know what to control for, to know what to control for, and to develop viable hypotheses. So in terms of sequence, usually descriptive epidemiology is what actually starts when you are, when you are really trying to understand some of the things. Usually you don't really first start to try to analyze things without actually first understanding describing the things. But after understanding the descriptive statistics or how things appear in terms of person, place, and time, you can then move further now to analytic epidemiology, where you then go in detail. You want to know where to look, you want to know how to control for, and then to develop viable hypotheses. As we discussed last time, there are three essential characteristics of disease that we need to look when we are doing descriptive epidemiology. We need to look into person, place, and in time. So those are the main characteristics of descriptive epidemiology, where we are looking into person, place, and time. In terms of person, there are so many parameters when you are describing a disease or a condition or a health event. So the person refers to really several things of a person. So there are several characteristics within a person. We can look at the age, are they young, are they old? We can look at the gender, are they male or female, ethnicity, and all those things. They differ in terms of in terms of predisposition to diseases. There are also genetic predisposition. Some conditions, they are inherited. Then concurrent disease, other people. I think I gave an example of COVID-19 these days. For people with COVID-19, they are more likely to die if they've got other concurrent diseases. Maybe if they're hypertensive, they've got diabetes, they've got, cardiovascular disease, they are more likely to die. So in terms of understanding a person, it's also critical to understand whether they've got concurrent illnesses. Then we have got diet, exercise, and smoking. I think these are non-risk factors for which predisposes people to develop disease. Then behavior is also very important. I know most of the conditions and most of the diseases and most of the health events which people end up developing, they are related to their behavior, the socio-economic status, the level of education, and the occupation. So by the person, we are looking into a whole lot of these issues. So there's more actually into understanding the person. Then in the place, it's mainly the geographic place which we are worried about. So in this geographic place, we are worried about climate. There are other climates which predisposes other health events or diseases from developing. Then there are presence of agents or vectors. So if you remember, there are areas which are endemic to some diseases. For example, things like Ebola, things like malaria. There are places where these diseases tends to occur. Why? Because the climate and the geographic and the geology and everything, tends to favor the growth of those organisms. Then population density, there are diseases which tends to occur more in overcrowded people. Then economic development, nutritional practices, and medical. practices. These, they tend to vary, depending with with the place. So by place, actually, we are also referring to all these issues which are critical in our descriptive epidemiology. Then for time, maybe these are some of the parameters which refers to time: the calendar time, the time since an event. Some conditions, they take time to develop, while others, they develop there and there. We also have what you call physiologic cycles. I think the common physiologic cycle, which you guys might understand, is the menstrual cycle, where it has different phases, the menstruation, the ovulation, whatever. So there are some conditions, which are affected by that. The other common physiologic cycle is the hormonal cycle. There are some hormones which tends to be higher at certain periods, and those hormones, actually, they can predispose the development of cycle. Then time, age is the time since birth. Then there are issues of seasonality in terms of seasons. We've got winter, we've got many other seasons: summer, autumn, winter, spring. So some of the conditions, they tend to occur in other seasons as compared to other seasons. Then there's what we call temporal trends. Usually, in terms of temporal trends, it's more of like which started, and what started in terms of the exposure and outcome relationships. And for example, we know there are some things which are thought to, for example, smoking can cause lung cancer. But in terms of temporal trends, we want to know which started between those two, and in terms of time now. Did someone smoke, then they later develop lung cancer, or they develop lung cancer, then they started smoking after developing lung cancer? So understanding those temporal trends in terms of time, it is also very critical and very, very important. So I'm just trying to repeat this, the place, the person, and time, so that you really understand your descriptive epidemiology. What are some of the things which you can look into when you're talking of descriptive epidemiology? So this is a question which you can discuss within your group. You have been asked to investigate an event in which 2,220 people were exposed, and out of the 2,220, 1,520 of them died. Your role as an epidemiologist is to ask questions about person, place, energy, and time. So you can discuss this, you can do this task within your groups, or you can do it alone, actually. You are given this scenario. So there is something which happened. Out of those people, you have got 2,220 people. Out of those 220 people, 1.520 of them died. As someone who is investigating this event, what are some of the questions which you can ask in terms of person, place, and in time? So this is just a hint with how can we ask those questions. You can conduct a survey, and you can conduct a survey where you ask the survivors, where you ask the next of kins, or other related persons. So yeah, this is just an example how you can really approach this. But there's more, because remember what you want to do in this. We have got 3 parameters. You want the person, you want the place, you want the person. To get information on all, remember the person is bigger. I gave you examples of person. The place, there are also a lot of parameters about place. The time is also. So you need to be very clear with what are the issues which you can ask under each of these elements: the person, place, and what, and time. So these are examples, which questions which you can ask. You can go through when you get the notes here. And for person, which questions are you going to ask? For place, which questions can you ask? Whatever. For time, which question can you ask? So now we're moving to the next stage, which is analytic epidemiology. So really for analytic epidemiology, we have got three essential characteristics that are examined. Remember, for analytic now, we really want to see the relationship between variables now. So for you to really start analyzing something, you can't analyze something if you don't have relationships. For you to start analyzing, you need at least, you're looking at relationship between variables. But one of the key aspects of epidemiology, we have these three elements where we call the host, the agent, and the environment. These three things, that's like, the key elements in analytic epidemiology, because we want to really understand the relationship between these three parameters. So we have what we call an epidemiologic homeostasis. Homeostasis, it just means there's a balance, and there's a balance. So the host, in terms of, if you are referring to human beings, diseases which happens in human beings, the human being will be the host, and it will be the host which is likely to get a disease. Then the environment is the environment where the human being lives. Then in the environment, there are agents which can then, so there's a relationship between the host, which is the human being, the environment, and the agent. And so for this, usually, if there is no disease, if everything is fine, in most cases, we say there's homeostasis, or there's a balance between the host, agent, and the environment. As long as you disrupt any of these elements now, there's no homeostasis, there's no balance between these things, then you tend to have diseases now developing, because there is no homeostasis, or there's no balance between these three elements. So these three elements, if they are combined, we call it an epidemiologic triangle. We call it what? An epidemiologic triangle. Remember, we said if there's a balance, if there's a problem in any of these things, either it is the host which has a problem, or it's the environment where there's a problem, or it's the agent where is the problem. This then really, triggers for disease to start to occur. What are some of the host factors actually which might predispose the human beings from getting infection? We have what we call personal traits, the way people behave, the way, the genetic predisposition, immunologic factors. Remember, these influence the chance of disease or its severity. And if someone has got a weak immune system, maybe they have got whatever their behaviors, whatever, they are likely to have disease. And if you are stronger, your immune system is more strong. The chance of getting disease is less as compared to someone who has a weak immune system. And so, in this case, the host can be affected by all those things which I have mentioned: their behavior, their genetics, their immunologic. If there's an upset within the host now can then become at risk of getting disease. Then we have got the agent now, and the agent, these are the things which are responsible for really kickstarting the disease process happening, and it's within the host. These agents can be biological, they can be physical, or they can be chemical, and they are necessary for disease to occur. So for biological, these are our pathogens, and which we have, our microbiology, or all those things, the bacteria, the viruses, the protozoa, and all those things which can actually lead to disease. We also have got physical things, and which can cause we also have physical things which can predispose people to to developing diseases, maybe physical injury. Then you also have other chemical things actually which can predispose people to disease. So for the disease to occur within the host, you need an agent which will be responsible for transmitting or passing the disease. Then we have got the environment. Remember, the host and the agent, all of them, they exist and operate within an environment, within some environment. This environment, it contributes to the disease, to the disease process. Remember, for some of the agents, whether they're chemical or whether they are biological, whatever, they need a conducive environment for them to be able to survive. I hope we take, for example, for malaria. We know for malaria to survive, you need to have within an environment where you've got grass which is not cut, where you've got ponds of water and water, which is not moving. You've got ponds, you've got long grass, all those things. Then in such an environment, the agent, which is the mosquito for malaria, can then survive. So this agent, it can then be able to transmit malaria to the host. So it is very important actually to really understand this epidemiologic triangle, this relationship between host, agent, and environment, because most of the things now, in terms of really trying to control diseases, is really based on addressing different corners, and on addressing different elements of this of this triangle. So by the host, remember, we can boost the immune system, we can do so many other things to make sure the host is safe. For the environment, for example, for malaria, we can do so many things within the environment to cut grass. We close all those ponds with with water, all those things. Then for the agent, so really try to manage this triangle is really key in preventing diseases. So as I said, usually for epidemics to arise or for disease to occur, they occur when the host agent and the environmental factors, they are not in balance. If these things are not in balance, that's when you have disease. And how can disease occur? Remember, it can occur due to several things. due to several things. For example, it can be due to a new agent. We know we didn't have this coronavirus, but it really surfaced, from birds, within China. Then there's this new agent which came. The host was not prepared for this, and it didn't have the immune system, which is the human being. So that's now people are dying because the host was not prepared to defend this new agent which has developed. Epidemics can also occur due to change in existing agents. How can this thing change? It can change in terms of infectivity, pathogenicity, or virulence. Usually these changes, they occur, by mutations, and you form a new organism. And because of the change of this new organism, what happens? You then have this thing occur. Or you can have epidemics occurring. Why? Due to change in the number of susceptibles in the population. Where people within the community, where you've got more people within the population becoming now susceptible to to a condition. So because of that, remember, either something may happen within the community. Let's say there's famine, there's hunger, people are not eating, people are immunosuppressed. Then because of that, you can have more people now getting infection. Then you can have, due to changes within the environment that affects transmission of agent or growth of the agent. So all these things actually, they can actually really predispose for disease to occur. So as I said, this triangle, epidemiology triangle, is very important. Why is it very important? Because it's that relationship. If you disrupt that relationship between host, agent, and environment, and if it's not in balance, then you then tend to have epidemics occurring. And any of the elements of that triad, any of those things can be affected. As long as one of these is affected, it then predisposes to disease what's developing. So just to recap again, for you to understand this whole concept, which is very important, where we're saying for analytic and for analytic, for descriptive epidemiology, we are talking of place, person, and what, and time. We want to know the demographic distribution, the geographic distribution, the seasonal patterns, and the frequency of disease patterns. Why is it important? Because if you know where people are affected, who is affected, we can actually use that for allocating resources. And we can also use the same for hypothesis development. For hypothesis development. Hypothesis development, remember, from descriptive, we might realize that maybe from the numbers, we have got more men who are affected as compared to female. Then from there, we can have an hypothesis to say, actually, maybe more men are likely to get this disease than female. Being male is a risk factor for this, but by just having percentages, I need to say more of this, we cannot actually then really say this thing and it is a risk factor. We might then need to do other analytic studies now, where we would then be able to really to use information which you get from descriptive to confirm whatever relationship which we are finding. So then for analytic relationship, for analytic epidemiology, one thing to understand, as I mentioned from the start, but one of the key things which is important for analytic epidemiology is the relationship between at least two variables. Remember, one of the things which we can really use in epidemiology is our epidemiology triangle, where now we are really looking into the effects of exposures in the disease. And if you are exposed to this, are you going to develop a disease? So that's the analytic part now. Remember, analytics, we are looking into relationships between 2G things. We are also looking for determinants or possible causes of disease. And analytic epidemiology is useful for hypothesis testing. So remember, as I give an example in the previous example, we might see there are more men based on the percentages, just proportion or by just counting. But for us to really see now, if the men is a risk factor for developing a disease, we need to go a step further, where we are now assessing the relationship between men, which is the exposure, and the disease, which is men. Then we can do a lot of other tests here, which can be done, and whatever, to then really see whatever relationship we have seen from descriptive, whether it really makes, whether there's an association, or we can really try to see the relationship between those two variables. So this is the just an introduction to analytic, to both the descriptive and analytic epidemiology. From here, we'll then be discussing, what are type of study designs which you see in, what are the study designs which we can use if you want to for descriptive purposes, and which studies do we also use for analytic epidemiology.